Hello everybody, and welcome to the Class Foundation Western European Markets Update. My name is Kellyanne Watson and I'm the Head of Programme Curation. Some of you may know me from Unipol in the UK, but for those who do not, I'm very excited to be part of this European agenda. Before we get started, I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to our partners. It's been a really tough 12 months for us all, but your continuous support has made events like this possible. We would also like to say a special thank you to Global Student Accommodation, also known as GSA, for being our gold sponsor for this session. And also to our media partners, The Pie, All Things Urban and Study Travel. We founded the class of 2020 10 years ago, with the aim to collaboratively solve the student housing challenges during an economic crisis. We grew with the community as a think tank, shaping the future of living, working and learning in university cities. We successfully graduated in 2020 and now have established ourselves with a shiny new branding, the Class Foundation. So I'd like to say a huge thank you to the team, Evelyn, Head of Marketing and Comms, and Manuel, Head of Partnership. This year, we have been working hard to create programmes and opportunities which enrich our community. I'm really excited to share with you our 4 up-and-coming academy titles: Community and Resident Wellbeing, Prop Tech, Spatial Design, Investment and Valuation. These learning experiences have been created by experts in a blended learning format to suit people and teams wanting to learn more in our sector. So if you head over to theclassfoundation.com, you can still register, but may I warn you, spaces are limited. For now, we will head over to the market updates. This session will focus on student housing acquisitions, investment and performance within the UK, Ireland, the Netherlands and Belgium. We will explore demand and the outlook for 2021 with future trends. We are seeing significant investment in these regions, but with the looming uncertainty due to COVID-19, what will our experts say on this topic? If you'd like to get involved with this session, we would love to hear all of your questions on our app, which you're now viewing this live stream through, called Swapcard. You can also use this platform to network with each other. We'll also be posting some polls to get you started, so you might actually be able to see some of those now. Also, post-event, make sure that you're @ing the Class Foundation on LinkedIn and Twitter. We want to hear from you and for you to get involved. So, Andrew Smith, the European PBSA Investment Advice, what a title may I say, from Cushman and Wakefield, will now present a 10-minute overview on levels of investment in student housing, specifically in Belgium, the Netherlands, Ireland and England, but we'll also be bringing in other snippets of the European context. Andrew will give a data-driven presentation on investment transactions, market fundamentals, including market sizes and changes, and will conclude with his own opinion on future trends. So over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Kellyanne. Can you hear me and can you see me on screen? Cracking. Thank you. I'm Andrew Smith. I run the Cushman and Wakefield UK student housing team, covering vals, research and capital markets, as well as working across Europe advising my clients on student housing. I'm under a very strict 10-minute rule today. So all I'll say about Cushman and Wakefield is that we're one of the world's largest property firms and we're different. We combine local and European expertise to advise on the sector, and we like to really get under the skin of things and answer the real questions. What's the real demand pool for student housing? What's the actual net income that can be delivered? Does the service offering match the rents? And what will happen, not just what has happened. Please feel free to get in touch with me or one of the team, and we'd really love to help. I've now only got 9 minutes to cover 4 countries with almost 4 million students and a portfolio of student housing that I estimate to be worth about 100 billion euros. I'll run you through some very high level stats on student numbers, beds, investment activity, whilst touching on factors like COVID and occupancy. But the last 2 points are probably better served by our expert panel, many of whom are actually at the coalface in terms of dealing with students day to day. So in terms of investment, I kind of think that what COVID-19 has done has been a catalyst for more investors moving into the beds and sheds category. And so that's logistics and anything with a bed. Student housing plays a huge part in that space. We're seeing an awful lot of institutional investors wanting to come into the student housing space, attracted by existing undersupply, the ability to see real rental growth, income sustainability, and the added bonus at the moment that student numbers tend to be negatively correlated with economic downturns. What I have to always remind people is that there are risks. We're generally talking about operational property, often developments where rents and costs may be unproven. So, I've got a little quote from the Cure on screen, but I'm a firm believer in our sector, but not every scheme at every price point in every town. And it's really about understanding the fundamentals to understand the investment context. To put the 4 markets that we have into a slightly wider context, some of the interesting stats, I won't run through them all, but the UK has 1 million less students than Germany, for example, but a larger international student population. The Netherlands has almost a third of the student population of Italy, but almost the same number of international students as well. Ireland has seen significant student number growth and has a state-declared housing crisis, which sort of feeds into its student housing world. And Belgium, we'll come on to some of the stats around there, but Belgium very much is seen as a core investment market with a yield profile very similar to the Netherlands and Germany, rather than sort of some of the other sort of countries of a similar size like Ireland and Portugal. One of the first questions I'm always asked by investors looking at the student housing space is, what are the key metrics that we should be looking at? They always start with student numbers. So I've put these 4 countries into a context by total number of students. There's a general spread. But what we always say is, well, the total number of students is great, but if everyone's staying at home and studying from home, they're not going to stay in student housing. So what's the true demand pool? What does that look like? But even then, there's no good having an investment if you can't either buy it or sell it. So the level of liquidity and the level of investment transactions is very important. And the 4 countries that I'm talking about now, are 4 out of the top 8 countries in terms of 2020 in terms of investment stats. So it's a good place to start as far as I'm concerned. I think it's always really important to remember with all of these things that you've got to look for beds to the demand pool, quality of beds provided, what's the service provision, what's the potential for other sources of income such as summer income, and what is the approach to accommodation by our university partners, which is pretty varied across most countries. I would say that the devil is in the detail, but we've got to start somewhere. So in terms of the UK market, I won't go through all of the stats, but the UK is one of the most developed PBSA markets in the world. People are attracted by 18 of the top 100 universities in the world are in the UK. You'll have heard this all before. What's interesting at the moment is that last year, university acceptances in the UK actually rose by 5%. But for the first time ever, a really significant portion of those students are not here. We estimate there to be about 120,000 international students enrolled at UK universities, but not in the UK. as well as a very high number of UK students studying from home, which has had knock-on effects onto occupancy that we'll come on to. What's going to happen next year? We've seen a huge rise in applications for UK universities, about 8.5% growth, which is historically the largest it's ever been. That's driven by UK pent-up demand and a huge rise in non-EU students applying to the UK. The one black spot from my point of view there is that EU applications to UK universities has fallen by 40% due to Brexit, which is a shame as far as I'm concerned. Sorry, just to finish up on the UK, Unite report their occupancy for this year in the high 80%, but I would say that covers a very wide range of occupancy, from buildings that are 20% full through to buildings that are 100% full. In terms of next year, they are 73% booked, which is behind the 80% that they'd achieved this time last year. And then the last point is that the largest cohort of international students in the UK is Chinese students. In terms of the Netherlands, the highest, it's a very attractive place to study as well. Highest percentage of English taught courses in Europe. For any pedants, that excludes Ireland. In the last 5 years, international students are up by over 33%. There are 7 of the top 10 universities in the world in the Netherlands, and our friends at Bonard believe that occupancy has held up better, with occupancy over 90% within the country. Interestingly, Nido had a couple of new assets that opened this year full, and those were largely filled with international students. The largest cohort in the Netherlands are Germans, of international students are German students. Moving on to Belgium, as I'm sure Herman will come to later, it's a very difficult market to get full information on, because there's a huge sort of divide between the north and south of the country, and historically you've seen a lot of mixed use student housing buildings as well as residential buildings, sort of in one category. There are 5 top universities in Belgium. 5 of the top universities in Belgium sit within the top 250 within Europe. And what we've seen, and what I'm sure Herman will come on to, is that occupancy as well has held up pretty strongly in Belgium. Quares reported achieving about 95% of revenue for 2020. It's an attractive place to study, particularly for French students, where the fees are lower than studying in France. And I think the other big positive from a Belgian perspective is that they've recently changed the legislation so that non-EU students have a year to find work after completing their studies, which I think is a very positive story for people wanting to study abroad. Moving on to Ireland. It's English speaking, there are some top universities, and it's the cultural home of something like 99% of Americans if you speak to them. Ireland has had a very hard lockdown for both domestic and international arrivals, which has created some pretty challenging occupancy, as people have found it hard to, campuses haven't opened, and you've had to quarantine for a couple of weeks to come into the country pretty much since last summer. In terms of, there are some positive stories there. In terms of applications for next year, those are up 8.5%. EU applications to Ireland are up hugely at 140%. Non-EU applications are up 17%, and even UK applications are up 26%. So hopefully there's some good news stories coming through there. And the other thing to point out for Ireland is that we're starting to see a number of development schemes that were in the pipeline are actually more viable for other uses, be that residential or it's largely residential at the moment. Moving on to investment volumes, the UK frankly dominates the European landscape. Over the last couple of years, it's averaged about 6 billion euros of the sort of 9 billion that's traded. I think it's that's a historical thing, that the UK market has traded much more of the market than other countries. But I think the other really interesting stat from my perspective is that generally Western Europe, the investment volumes are very lumpy, because the main driver of that is a lack of supply of stock rather than a lack of investment demand. So if you look at France, for example, had lots of transactions in 2019, but then much less last year, because frankly those who own stock there have wanted to hold on to it rather than sell on. Another potential reason for the UK's dominance is that historically institutional investment in residential hasn't happened in the UK. So if you include the UK residential and student together, and you do the same for the Netherlands, Ireland and Belgium, actually the overall investment volumes are actually closer to the size of the economies. The Netherlands sort of outperformed in 2020 because there was a change in transfer tax rising from 2 to 8%, which meant everyone got their deals done towards the end of 2020. But I certainly think that as the UK's residential investment market grows, it'll probably sit more in line with other countries where student makes up a decent portion of that element rather than dominating so much. In terms of significant deals that have happened over the last few months in these cities, I won't run through these all, but we've seen the likes of Greystar, Aries, Bearings coming into the UK, Greystar active in the Netherlands, as well as Soare being very active in the Netherlands and Belgium. Ireland is conspicuous by its absence from transactions that have happened over the last 6 to 9 months, but we see that catching up pretty quickly as travel restrictions ease, and the occupancy position comes a bit clearer coming into Q4 this year. Based on my rehearsals, and yes, I did rehearse, imagine what it could have been, that took about 10 minutes on a whistle-stop tour. So please do reach out to myself or the team if you want to talk about any of these markets, or you just fancy a catch up. I'll let Kelly and Anne introduce the panel before we jump into some questions.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew. That was really interesting, and lots of different data on lots of different topics, lots of different regions as well. I think it's going to be really interesting to bring in more of a kind of operational view as well from our panel. So that's going to be really, really interesting. It's a great piece of work as well that you and your team have done. So kind of, congratulations on that piece of research. So we are going to now host a panel discussion with Herman, who is a partner from Quares, Rienk, who is the Chief Real Estate Officer from the Student Hotel, Christopher, Growth and New Business Director from GSA, and Daniel, the Managing Director from Harrison Street, along with Flory, working in the investment and portfolio team within IQ Students. So let's start the Q&A. We're going to start off introducing the panel, which I think would be really useful so you can all get to know each other. Can we start off by giving your name and the company and what you are doing in these markets? So a bit of information on beds and countries you're working in, and then finish off with one fun fact related to your company and portfolio. So should we start off with Herman?
Hi. Thanks. Well, you all certainly know Hazard, De Bruyne, and Lukaku. My name is Herman de Bois. Their asset class, they're number 1 in the world. Our asset class in Belgium, as you have noticed by the data of Andrew, is still growing and coming to the market. The statistics 2 years ago, which are just behind me, show no data. Well, with Quares student housing, where I'm a partner indeed, we have about 1,200 beds under management and growing. It's a market that is evolving very much. So welcome to Belgium.
Thank you, Herman. I'm really excited to learn more about the Belgian market as well. It seems, yeah, right, kind of, it's always really interesting when, you know, there's limited data to kind of explore and learn more about those kind of markets. So Rienk, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Rienk, working for GSH, the student hotel, since 2016. Since then, we went actually quite through a roller coaster. At that time, in 2012, we opened our first asset in the Netherlands. 2016, we were on 4 operational assets, and today we have 16 operational throughout Europe. We're active in 8 countries in Europe. We have 11 projects under development across Europe. And maybe important to mention here, the student hotel, as the word hotel states, is more than student resi only. We are a hybrid product. We are operating between co-living, co-working, hotel. And I think one of our key drivers is bringing communities together. So we spend a lot of energy on the operating side of the business, making sure people feel at home. And I will elaborate a bit more on this later in the panel, but I think that was one of the big elements of doing that. Again, 11,000 rooms in total, of which 7,000 are open.
Well, thank you for that, Rienk. It's always really interesting to hear about what the student hotel are doing, especially with the kind of blended approach to kind of that co-living, co-working space, and also the kind of the student aspect as well. So it'll be really interesting to hear about what you're doing in the sector at the moment. Chris from GSA, would you like to give an overview? Oh, you're currently on mute.
There you are. Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Holloway. I'm the Director of Growth and New Business at GSA. GSA, as I guess many people will know, stands for Global Student Accommodation. That's what we do. We do accommodation for students on a global basis. We currently have 34,000 operational beds globally, including in the UK, about just under 10,000 beds. In Ireland specifically, we're the #1 operator with over 3,500 beds. And we also have roughly 3,500 beds in Spain, 3,000 in Germany, and over 8,000 in the USA. In terms of fun facts, I'm not sure I can manage fun, but I will give you facts. We saw fastest growth of our business ever during the lockdown. So that either tells you that we're very, very efficient, or that we spend too much time on planes generally and we should spend more time working. The first deal we did during lockdown was a third-party management deal with Harrison Street in Spain. We followed that up with another third-party deal in Cork. All of those to be launched this academic year. And at 7 a.m. on Christmas Eve in 2020, we closed the acquisition of 27 operational assets in America. And we also carried out an M&A operation of an operating business in America as well on Christmas Eve. So that was very exciting. And that's us.
Well, somebody was working late on Christmas Eve then. I bet somebody wasn't too happy with
It was a really good time to be global, because we were handing the baton off around the business as time zones changed. So it was a really interesting relay closing.
Well, we're really excited to have such a large and established, operator involved with this discussion. And it, nicely moved on to Harrison Street. Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Kelly, and thanks, Chris. My name is Daniel Gorzawski. I'm heading the European transactions for Harrison Street. Harrison Street is a fund, an investment manager that's active in the alternative real asset space for over 15 years. We've been specializing on education, healthcare, storage, and life sciences within the real estate space, managing approximately 32 billion of assets between the US and Europe. We started to invest in Europe through dedicated pan-European funds in 2015, and since then have invested in developments, acquisitions of more than 3.5 billion across 5 countries: UK, Ireland, France, Germany, and Spain. And apart from student housing, our investment strategy in Europe also includes micro-living, co-living, BTR, retirement living, and life sciences. 2 facts: in Europe, we own more than 18,000 student housing beds. And in the US, we're the largest private owner of student accommodation, where we have invested in over 150,000 student housing beds.
Wow. No, that's amazing. I didn't even know some of those facts. So thank you, Daniel. That was really interesting. And Florrie, who is from IQ Students, would you like to give us an overview?
Yes, thank you, Kellyanne. Good morning, everyone. My name is Florentina-Diana, but I go by Florrie. I work in the investment and portfolio team at IQ Student Accommodation. IQ is the second largest owner-operator of private PBSA in the UK. And we have a presence across 27 cities in the UK with more than 28,000 beds across 68 schemes, with an additional 3,000 beds in the pipeline and growing. And I guess a fun fact would be that we have had over 1 million parcels being redeemed via the IQ app in the last 18 months that the app has been launched.
Wow, fantastic. Lots and lots of parcels then.
Yeah,
and obviously it's great to have IQ represented here today as well, with the kind of large merger that happened of 4.6 million, I believe, in 2020. So it's really great to hear what's going on within your company as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Andrew for the Q&A. And the first section we're going to discuss is the current situation: COVID, change, and adapt.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm just that's 30, I'm just going back to Florrie's point, that's 35 packages per person. It's crazy.
It's not even that much, because it's only 18 months.
That's what happens when you can't leave the house.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a lot of cardboard. It's a lot of cardboard. Right. I guess one of the things that we get asked again when investors want to come into the space is, well, obviously everyone's online now. Aren't universities going to die and change and everything be online and all this hybrid learning? Do students enjoy hybrid learning, and is it a threat to PBSA? I will start with Chris.
I think that hybrid learning is a very different experience for the students. You can learn in a blended fashion, or even you can learn fully online. I've done it myself. I actually trained as an online tutor as well many years ago. So it can be done, and you can get good information, and you can really develop your skills. What you can't do is develop that interactive part of the student experience that is so vital, particularly I think your first time round. It's that moving away from home, it's gaining those life skills, it's gaining those community living skills that I think all of us as student operators provide a space for that to happen across the board. And I think that's the part. It's the kind of what's the right word? The informal education that you can't replicate online. So I think that they really do they can get the knowledge from hybrid, but not the informal education.
Fair enough. To my mind, that's a fairly comprehensive answer. Is there something that anyone wants to add on to? I mean, what we've seen is people say, that it's not going to lectures they miss, it's everything else.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, over the last 12 months, you've seen a lot of surveys coming out that's polling universities and students, and you have 96% of everyone wants to go back in-person teaching for all the right reasons. I mean, it's, as Chris was saying, you really have to love your parents after 12 years of school to stay another 2 years and learning from your bedroom. And yeah, university experience is so much more than just learning, right? It's about the experience, growing up, independence, social context, building up a network, all things that are impossible, or at least not fun doing online. And I think that really holds true for everyone. So everyone we spoke to and every surveys we've seen are really indicating that people are very eager to get back on campus in the classroom and have that student experience, which is more than just an online screen and studying at home.
Okay. So things have changed. I come to you, Rienk. Have you had to change your operational model?
Yes, we need it, in the sense that obviously we have a hybrid model in itself, which means that normally in the academic year, we lower the amount of hotel rooms to, let's say, 20% of our stock is being used for hotel market, 80% for students. In the summer, we switch that to the opposite. Obviously, since the hotel market is not there, we were more and more focused on being 100% student, which is not something we've been doing over the last years. So there was a change going on. Also from the whole flexibility where students were looking for. Our focus has always been on the international students. I think up to 80 to 90% of our rooms are being booked by international students. And as you might imagine, since last year, April, when universities went online, students were obviously not as keen on traveling as they were before. What we learned, however, in that was that the ones who were traveling, really making the decision for the university, even the university went online, people still wanted to go to a certain university. That is slightly different if they make that decision to go abroad, driven by not only the decision on university, but also the leisure, pleasure element coming with it. So we saw a difference, for instance, in Barcelona, where people, if they go to Barcelona, quite often they do that in a combination of, it's an amazing city, I want to learn the language. But suddenly that is obviously totally different in the current situation than if you go to a city like Delft, which is known by the Technical University in the Netherlands. And then people still go there. So we saw across our portfolio quite a different approach, what we needed to do to be flexible for those, let's say, new bookings coming in September. And it had a lot to do with, giving them the comfort that if things were at a safe place in the student hotel. And I think we managed quite well to get there. And the lucky part of that is that we have the ability, since we are a hotel and we have hotel facilities coming with it, such as meeting and event space or co-working space, what we have blended into our common areas. We could offer our students a lot of space working from the accommodation. So if you walk into a student hotel today, it's probably more vibrant than ever before, because on average you have 400 students using the whole ground floor. Our meeting space has been turned into classrooms for them. So yes, I think it was from a real estate perspective, but also from an approach how to book them, to attract them and to give them the comfort to get in. That has been a change for us.
Okay, interesting. And how about you, Herman? Have you had to change your approach to operations?
Not really, of course. There was a very active approach in this, that we all realized that nothing could be taken for granted any longer, and focus on quality was very much on the agenda. But quality has many faces, where quality, of course, you have the physical health, you have the mental health, you have the financial health. All those topics came to the attention, and as long as you're a proactive asset manager or facility manager even, I think you can respond to all those requirements, and it's evolving, and that's where we with Quares stands for.
Okay, fantastic. Florian, have you had to change the operational model in terms of one of the big questions in the UK is about length of stay and rent rebates?
Yeah, so I would say that taking everything into consideration, our operational model hasn't really changed. We're still offering sort of a mix of short-term and long-term lets. So short-term lets being anything between 42, 44 weeks and slightly longer, and long-term lets being 50 to 51-week tenancies. We're not really offering semester lets unless we're looking to backfill and avoid rooms throughout the current year. We have had to introduce, however, some additional flexibility at the front end in terms of tenancy start dates, which has been key to accommodate the travel restrictions, university guidance, and maintaining the safety of our students. We have seen, however, a bigger take-up of short-term lets in the last couple of years since COVID, but we do believe that this trend will be reversed in the future.
Okay, interesting. Interesting. In terms of services, you touched on it, Rienk, but are you having to change what services are being offered to your students to attract them? Are you offering things like extra cleaning, or are there sort of non-financial other ways that you're attracting students?
Well, I think, to be honest, if you look at the whole element of safety is obviously for a student slightly different than for the parent. So if the student itself in general feels, I think, relatively safe in the current COVID environment. Obviously, they are careful about what they do, but less I would imagine than the parents are. So it's a two steps of approach. We definitely want to make sure that the abilities are there if parents of the students are let's say worried about certain things, that we can offer a lot of things in sense of extra cleaning. In general, TSH likes to offer cluster kitchens because we believe in building communities, but we moved some of our rooms, our short stay rooms, to students, which are rooms with kitchenettes. We saw there was a lot of traction in those rooms in the early phase, September. However, halfway the year, in December, we had a lot of students changing from that same individual room back to the cluster kitchen because they felt they want to be part of the community. And you see there, that probably there's a different level of requirement of safety when it comes to parents and students themselves. And obviously we need to answer both of them. But overall, I don't feel there has been a big change in management in order to get that safety feeling. No, I felt we're quite comfortable there.
It's very interesting because this time last year, there was a lot of people saying, well, studios are going to be the new ensuite rooms because of COVID, and that you're saying that sort of happened and then was reversed within a year. Is that how you're seeing things, Chris? Are you?
Yeah, we didn't really notice a huge change in that. It's probably true that we followed a similar pattern to what Rienk's described, where studio bookings are always faster. So we're not sure what was the chicken and what was the egg in that situation. And talking to developers and investors, in all of the different markets, there was this initial thought that, oh my God, we've got to change all of our plans. We've got to have no more, whether it's studios, whether it's clusters, we've got to change everything and just build studios for the future. And the reality is, we're seeing now a reversion to the mean, and everybody's going back to what they did before. So maybe there was an opportunity for some real disruption in thinking in the kind of construction space, and that's kind of withered away, unfortunately, over time. So I think we will just go back to where we were before. What's probably more telling is that some universities are kind of imposing criteria for their group bookings, whether that's nominations in the UK or other types of group bookings in other countries, that include safety provisions. So, for example, we're seeing some particularly American global campus universities dictating that the maximum number of people sharing a kitchen is 2 or 3, and so actually that spread of clusters and larger clusters might not be appropriate for those universities going forward. So that's a consideration that's being driven by the customer end rather than by the construction end.
Yeah, really interesting to hear about kind of what's going on in the currently going on operationally. Why don't we move over on to next year and whether people are feeling optimistic or worried about it, Andrew?
I guess it's a very wide-ranging question, but are we, the numbers we've seen in terms of applications, at the moment I only have the UK and the Irish numbers, but the application numbers are hugely up for next year, particularly from international students. The difference in the UK being EU numbers being down. Are we expecting an awful lot of international travel for next year? When I say next year, I mean this September. I shall put that to Rienk.
I mean, operating in 8 countries across Europe. So we do see a difference. What we see is that the Netherlands is benefiting from the Brexit, in the sense that obviously the Erasmus students who normally quite often go to the UK for the English language, they now decide to go to the Netherlands because Netherlands has a strong reputation, as you mentioned, Andrew, in your introduction, that universities are teaching mainly in English. So we see a really grow there coming in. The amount of application of international students indeed is big, but a lot of European students. At the same time, we see in Italy, which is our second biggest market, which is having a lot of American students in general coming in. They're obviously a bit more conscious. The safety element from an American perspective is in general bigger as a, let's say, requirement / concern than what we see within Europe. But at the same time, you see that students are really willing to make that step. And again, if you think about yourself, being standing still for 1.5 years at home, the need to go somewhere else, I think that need is, on the end of the day, the driver of people moving again. So yeah, I think the pickup is definitely coming up there again across Europe, and I fundamentally believe that international student demand is still growing and will grow going forward.
Good. Because I'm going to quote this. I'm going to quote something from Herman's annual report. I think it was President Macron. 2020 wasn't easy if you're 20. Herman, have you had to change the cohort that you've been targeting for your buildings?
Well, the Belgian market is very much driven by domestic students, because also for the linguistic issues we have in our country, they're evolving and numbers of students are increasing constantly. And the next growth will come from international students, where more English taught courses are on the agenda and implemented, not any longer for bachelors, but also for master, not only for masters, but now also more for bachelor students. So a growing offering of education, which is one of the qualities of Belgium though. And also the housing market stands for a growth which we have to cope with. So we are optimistic about quantities and have challenges about the quality of offering the next years.
Okay, interesting. Chris, are you targeting different cohorts in the UK and Ireland?
So we've never had a kind of predominantly international focus in our marketing or in our approach to students. We've always had a balanced approach, so that we're looking for, we understand that there's a strong domestic market, but also international market. I would say there's some cities do behave differently. So I think London particularly was always hugely driven by international students, and I would say that we're not seeing quite the return yet to pre-COVID in London and maybe Dublin. But we feel that that corner will turn once policy changes in different countries come into effect, particularly China, and vaccine programs are completed and people just generally feel safer and are able to travel. So we're optimistic, but there are specific markets even within the broader markets that are not quite there yet.
Okay. I mean, I'll throw it out to everyone. Is anyone else looking at targeting different cohorts for this year, or shall we move on to our moving into wider future questions?
We do have a couple of questions as well from the audience in the chat, Andrew. Was there anything that you think would be useful to pick up just while we're on this topic?
I'm just trying to read them as we go.
I know we have covered some of them. Countries focusing on developing a PBSA product that meets.
So someone says that, I think this is a UK-based question, and they say, are any countries focusing on developing a PBSA product that meets the needs of domestic students rather than internationals? Primarily, this is a cost factor. We know that domestic students living in HMOs are happy living in smaller shared spaces without additional facilities for a cheaper price. I guess, yeah, look, I'm more than happy to for someone to answer that question. Seeing as I've just spent a minute, you've seen how good I am at reading.
Yeah.
Well, again, I think it's not a specific focus. It has not been a specific focus for us, but what we've seen over the last years, pre-COVID, but also currently, specifically students who are doing a master, for instance, or doing an exchange for domestic, you know, they do a course from Rome and Florence, or the student who's doing their studied in Groningen and doing the master in Rotterdam, which are Dutch students or Italians within their country moving and doing that here. I think the main difference in general is that a product like a PBSA is quite often focused on, you know, building that friendship there. And when people are there, quite often, and they stay for longer, they find their own way. So first year students moving into a PBSA, then afterwards they know their friends, and then they know their way around in the city and find their own spot. I think that is the reality of how often things happening. So it's not a focus on itself, but I do see obviously that domestic students have a clear position in that market of PBSA.
I think that if the question really is going to the core issue of affordability, this is a massive growing concern across all markets globally. As PBSA has grown and people and investors and developers have clustered at the top end of the market, driven by land prices, essentially, you know, we have to kind of find some way of addressing those students and families that can't afford what the top end of the market is offering. But there is there's a large public sector there as well in most countries. So the question is one of policy and whether affordability is a governmental and public issue rather than a private issue. That's, I think, a debate that could take us into another 3 or 4 hours here easily. I'd be delighted to have that with many people. But I can tell you that there are private players throughout Europe addressing that. But it's very much on the agenda right now. Difficult to answer, but very much on the agenda.
I mean, if people have read our recent UK research, actually the universities in the UK have been increasing their pricing almost faster than private sector. A lot of that is because they're upgrading their stock, but affordability is a huge issue, and we've only got it. I think we've got a few more minutes left, so we might have to park affordability in the short term.
We have actually asked in one of our polls, what issues do you think the sector needs to address, and affordability is within there. So it'd be really good to hear whether the attendees think that it's something that needs to be addressed, and potentially we could have a separate conversation further down the line.
Indeed, it's
got to be addressed. Sorry, Herman, please.
Yeah, indeed, it's a very important topic that's in the pick list or top #1 for the universities in Belgium. Even though education is very cheap in Belgium, it's financed by the public, though the housing market is 95% private market. So there is a partnership to be found between these affordability challenges for the domestic families, and everything is relative. And on top of that, also for more international students to find that balance. And that's a very interesting challenge. knowing that there is an undersupply for the moment of quality rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be really good to move on to some more future questions, Andrew.
Sure. One of the major questions that we have is, are you seeing a widening gap between primary and secondary pricing? Daniel, how are you seeing the investment market there?
We talk about investment yields and investment markets, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So right now there is a widening gap, and you see the risk premium widening in tougher times, and that's what we're seeing right now. And the risk assessment, obviously, it extends beyond just the direct property situation, all the way to the credit of the universities and the financial strengths and their financials, where we've seen quite a bit of a bifurcation already pre-COVID between the different universities, depending on the ratings and their enrollment numbers. But COVID obviously has put a significant strain on the university's income and their cash flow. Although the government support program announcement has had the desired effect of reducing, I think, a lot of the anxiety that was there prior to that. From an investment perspective, we prefer to stick to primary markets. We really only invest in cities with strong universities that have a good size existing student population and especially important growing enrollment in those universities.
Okay. Herman, are you seeing a change in pricing between primary and secondary assets?
It's a bit difficult. We are a very small country, so everything is prime. So we have top universities 50 kilometers away from each other, a scattered landscape of top quality. And scattered means in geography, it's very small distances. So there is no secondary market linked to education and housing. I don't see a secondary market, again, in this micro market of Belgium. I cannot compare with other countries because we are really active in this market.
Okay. How about Florrie, would you have a view on the UK? You have a large and varied portfolio.
Yeah, sure thing. So from an investment perspective, what we've seen is that yields and valuations in the UK student housing sector haven't really changed that much following COVID. If anything, yields in London, what we call super prime regional cities, are sort of continuing to tighten, and perhaps only yields in secondary and more tertiary locations starting to suffer, so that the spread between the best and the worst locations is actually widening a little bit.
Interesting. I think one of the things that another big question that we get from investors is, is government legislation helping? Is it helping or hindering the student housing market as it helps the wider residential market? I mean, you've got rent caps in Ireland, you've got the point system in the Netherlands, and you've got the potential for, under the new London plan, you have a requirement for affordable student in London, and that may be moving into other cities. Do you see that helping or hindering long-term affordability? I'll come back to you, Florrie, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure thing. So I think under the new London plan, any future PBSA developments in London will have to have a minimum of 35% affordable beds, which will be fixed rent cap, which could be a significant discount to direct let rent as much as 50% or more. So I think this new planning approach would definitely help in terms of providing affordable accommodation for London students. I think the one question that arises is more how part affordable, part nominated, part direct let scheme would be managed from an operational perspective. As universities want to nominate affordable beds in entire cluster flats, we have different parts of the scheme may need to be managed separately, potentially different stair cords and maybe different entrances and receptions. So that would lead to an increase in build costs and also operational costs, which may make certain schemes unviable. So I think it's a very interesting concept. The truth is we haven't got any examples of any London schemes that have been built under the new London plan. So it'll be interesting to see how it will actually work in reality.
Okay.
But on the end of the day, this drives back to, I think, land values is a big driver of this whole discussion on the end of the day, isn't it? I mean, the example Florentina mentioned, I would be super disappointed if it drives the let's say the private sector to a situation that they develop two types of schemes under one roof with two entrances, two communities. If you think about, building communities, bringing people together, you should bring it really into one roof. But that directly leads to land values. That's the main to get that up and running. I would love to incorporate a bit more that let's say affordable rooms in our schemes. I think it would actually be benefiting everyone, even the community, from a perspective to understand that, blending those.
Absolutely. Daniel, what's your view on something like rent caps in Ireland? Is it hindering or helping the market at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, any sort of rental cap regulation, or also what we're seeing in other countries in limiting planning or putting affordability, and it's unfortunately is a very short-term thinking, and the knee-jerk reaction is looks like a simple solution, or the rents are rising too fast, that just put the rental cap on that. But I mean, the direct second round effect is very simple. There's going to be less private developers that are going to provide accommodation, because it just, there's a disconnect between land value and cost to develop, and what's, what margin you can do on the other hand. So it's a very short-term thinking that in all situations that we've monitored across European cities has always led to a shortage in supply. So it's in the medium term, it really backfires very, very strongly. And development cycles take time, so you cannot switch it on and off. Once it's really shut down, it's going to take longer to really get the supply up. And I mean, we discussed about international students demand increasing, and if you have increasing demand but supply is not coming, it just leads to more squeezing, more shortages, and less people being able to live in those cities. So it's really, I have a very negative opinion on general rental cap regulation.
Fair enough. I'm sorry, we have a lot of questions coming in, but I think, Kellyanne, we're sort of we're out of time, and I would quite like to get the last question in, because what we've asked for all of our panel members is, can you point to any positive learnings or good news stories from COVID? Because it's been a year of bad news. So can we end with some positive stories? Herman, did you manage to come up with a good news story?
What we have learned within the team of Quares is that the top focus on the SDGs over the last year and 18 months, which was, of course, coming up very much in the processes and the vision to be developed. And the aspect of the environmental thing was, of course, an obvious, but also the well-being came very much to the attention. And that's our challenge for the future, to work on that and to be much more closer to our students who are screaming to be back in the universities and in the student rooms.
Fantastic. Chris?
On the environmental point, I guess just traveling less. We as a company have had lower impact on our environment this year. Our frontline teams have worked harder than ever. Our frontline teams have pulled together, and I know that this is true of the Student Hotel and IQ and everyone else in our market. This isn't a purely GSA thing. Every single frontline team has had to work harder under enormous pressure and stress, and they're facing those health scares and health difficulties themselves, and they have done an extremely good job as an industry. The whole of PBSA at the operational phase has been absolutely superb, and I think they are absolutely to be congratulated and given the credit, because they've pulled us through this and they'll get us through it. And those of us that are lucky enough to have been sat at home, I think really owe them a debt of gratitude. So I think that's the biggest positive for me in this too.
Yeah, I agree. We've been very impressed, and also have to give a big compliment to our operating partners and how they reacted very fast, very pragmatic, and very professional, really making sure that the properties and operations comply with a very rapidly changing regulatory landscape. at the same time keeping our attendants safe, providing best information, and also a service to them, because the communication and the interaction with the students was really important, and it's not easy. So yeah, I echo what Chris is saying, and I know that's been true across the board from many of the operators on the panel here.
Fantastic.
Well, yeah, well, thank you, everybody. That is time. And I just really love to say thank you to Andrew for kind of leading this session and giving us all that really great information at the beginning of the session as well. I do know that we haven't been able to get through everybody's questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to take your questions away, and I'm going to share them with the panel, and we're going to create some sort of blog post event to answer some of your questions. I think yeah, it would be really useful. So if you want to keep putting some more questions through to ask the panel, please do, and we can share that on LinkedIn and social media afterwards. So just thank you to everybody again today. It was a really fruitful discussion. I hope everybody found the session as interesting as I did. If you would like to find out more about what the class is doing here, please just head over to our website or follow us on LinkedIn, drop us a message, drop me a message or an email. We hope to see you at our future events, and if you have any ideas or you think that the class should be working and starting a discussion in any other areas, you know, the sector has done an amazing job picking itself up after COVID, and these sort of sessions are a great way to kind of share experiences and good practice. So if hopefully we can see each other all soon.